when we look back across the last 15,000 years of history, like I mentioned, we don't see just sort of constant upward trend in these scores. There are several periods when we get discontinuities, where we get collapses in social development scores. Now, and you can see several very clear examples on this graph. And when we look back at the history of what happens when we get these great collapses in social development, excuse me, I have to whiz forward here several slides because I left out the one I needed. Every time we see a great collapse, we see the same 5 forces involved. Mass migrations that the societies of the day can't cope with. This is always in the mix. The mass migrations often lead to huge epidemic diseases as previously separate disease pools get merged. Epidemic diseases, regularly killing half the population, it would seem, tend to lead to state failure. Governments cannot cope with catastrophe on this scale. The collapse of the governments tends to lead to breakdown in long-distance trade. Famines ensue, many more people die. And then always there in the mix in some way, although it varies in every case, is climate change, which always plays into this. Now, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that these are forces that plenty of people are talking about as threats we're facing in the early 21st century. It seems to me perfectly possible that the 21st century is going to see another collapse of the kind we've seen so many times in the past. So in some ways, it's possible the 21st century might be a rerun of what's happened many times before, but with one big difference, that we now have nuclear weapons, which ancient people didn't have. The Romans would have loved nuclear weapons, but luckily they didn't have them. And this is actually 60-year-old technology you're looking at in the picture here. This is one of the long-tom nuclear cannons from the Korean War period, never actually used, of course. We now have nuclear weapons. I think if we do stumble into a collapse on the scale that I'm talking about here, we should seriously expect there's a possibility of these being used. It's quite possible the 21st century will see a disaster that dwarfs anything we've seen earlier. So I guess to me it seems that the implication of the Social Development Index is that the 21st century is going to see more profound change than the world has ever seen before, although it's very hard to know what direction that profound change will take us.